I recognize the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask that the unanimous consent the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, yesterday evening we invoked cloture on the nomination of Jamieson Greer to be U.S. Trade Representative. Mr. Greer is admirably qualified for this position. He spent most of his career specializing in trade law and has extensive international experience. He served as a missionary in Brussels, received a master's degree from 2 Paris institutions, served as a law clerk for the European Court of Justice, and was stationed in both Turkey and Iraq as a member of the Air Force. Most significantly of all, he spent 3 years of the previous Trump administration serving as Chief of Staff to then U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, who spoke highly of Mr. Greer's work. He is, in short, very well prepared for this role. Mr. President, one of my top priorities when it comes to trade is expanding opportunities for our nation's agricultural producers, like the many farmers and ranchers in my state of South Dakota. The Biden administration frequently seemed to have no interest in trade beyond negotiating on climate and labor issues. Witness the fact, Mr. President, that there was not a single FTA negotiated during the Biden administration. Not a single one. All the opportunities across the globe to enter into trade agreements, to open up and provide access to America's farmers and ranchers and small business people. Well, that was a real disservice, Mr. President, to America's ag producers and to our small businesses. Trade is critical to the continued success of American agriculture. 20% of U.S. ag products are exported yearly, and exports provide substantial farm income. Soybeans and corn alone accounted for 22% of all U.S. exports by value in 2024. But thanks in part to the Biden administration's almost complete inaction on trade, the current agricultural trade deficit is at an all-time high. And Mr. President, that's an area of our economy where we've always run trade surpluses, historically. Consistently over time, decade after decade, we've always run trade surpluses in agriculture until the last few years under the Biden administration, where we started racking up not only deficits, but now record trade deficits. They're at an all-time high. And I have to say that's a real problem for ag producers, especially considering the other challenges they've been facing. And it's something that needs to be addressed. And I know that the Trump administration is committed to meeting the needs of farmers and ranchers, and I'm looking forward to working with Mr. Greer to expand opportunities for our agricultural producers. I'm very encouraged by the fact that Mr. Greer has expressed his commitment to working closely with the Senate Finance Committee, of which I am a member, and with Congress. President Biden's trade representative was completely uninterested in working with Congress, so it is very encouraging to hear Mr. Greer's commitment to communication and collaboration. And I look forward to a close partnership between the administration and Congress in the coming months and years as we work to expand opportunities for American producers. Mr. President, this afternoon we're going to vote on a resolution to end the energy emergency that President Trump declared upon taking office. Apparently, according to the resolution's authors, this energy emergency declaration isn't justified. And Mr. President, in response to that, I'd like to just read a headline from the Washington Post last March. And that headline is, and I quote, "Amid explosive demand, America is running out of power," end quote. Now let me just repeat that, Mr. President, for my Democrat colleagues. Amid explosive demand, America is running out of power. Running out of power. The article stated, and I quote again, "Vast swaths of the United States are at risk of running short of power as electricity-hungry data centers and clean technology factories proliferate around the country, leaving utilities and regulators grasping for credible plans to expand the nation's creaking power grid," end quote. And then, of course, there was this headline from another major news outlet in December, and I quote again, "More than half the U.S. faces blackout risks in next decade," the NERC finds, end quote. Again, more than half the U.S. faces blackout risks in next decade. Large swaths of the U.S., the article noted, could experience rolling blackouts due to capacity shortfalls during extreme weather events in the next decade, according to a grid reliability analysis released Tuesday. The Mid-Continent Independent System Operator faces the highest risk of energy shortfalls starting as soon as this summer, according to the report from the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which can force grid operators to trigger rolling outages to prevent wider system harm, end quote. Mr. President, these aren't niche publications. These are mainstream media outlets. Mainstream media outlets reporting on the fact that, and I quote again, America is running out of power. If my Democrat colleagues don't consider that an emergency, I just don't know what to say. Mr. President, as these articles and others make clear, the United States electric grid is extremely shaky. Thanks in substantial part to a movement to shut down fossil fuel-fired power plants before reliable sources of clean energy are available to replace them, America is running out of power, even as we face huge new power demands. The boom in data center construction in particular to power the rise of artificial intelligence is placing and will place vast new demands upon the grid. A recent CNBC headline noted, and again I quote, "Data centers powering artificial intelligence could use more electricity than entire cities," end quote. More electricity than entire cities. And Mr. President, if we continue on our current course, there is a very real risk that we're not going to be able to meet that demand, that we're going to end up with widespread brownouts and blackouts, or electricity rationing, or de facto rationing forced by sky-high energy bills. Now, Mr. President, I realize that this is an inconvenient truth to my Democrat colleagues. Why? Because it interferes with their plans to force the United States off conventional energy. If Democrats acknowledge that we are rapidly approaching an energy crisis, they might have to actually consider the consequences of their energy plans. To consider what might happen when you put immense new power demands on an already shaky grid by forcing Americans into electric vehicles. To consider what might happen if you drastically limit domestic oil and gas production, even as the nation continues to require a steady and affordable supply of conventional fuels. And so I do understand why Democrats would prefer not to acknowledge our national energy emergency. But acknowledge it or not, it's there. And if we don't take action, we're going to be facing some very serious problems in the very near future. So I'm grateful to have a president who recognizes and acknowledges the energy emergency facing our nation. And I look forward to working with him to unleash American energy production and achieve a secure, affordable, and reliable energy future for the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.